Hi class, today we're going to be studying the French Revolution. Today's a little bit of an introduction. We're not going to get into the big events, but we're going to look at the causes and the early occurrences. The conditions in France around the time of the Revolution, a little bit before, are as follows. The pre-revolutionary system in France is known as the Ancien regime. Ancien regime basically means the old ruling system. If you will recall, France was ruled by a monarchical system that was absolute in nature. What that means is the king had all the authority, the final say, etc. In the Ancien regime, the people of France were divided into three distinct categories. The categories were entitled estates. The first estate contained members of the clergy, the second estate contained members of the noble and royal classes, and the third estate contained everyone else, from the bourgeoisie middle class to all the way down to the lowly peasant and the working class. Now I'm going to pause here for a second for you guys to get these notes down because this is the preliminary stuff. This is a little bit important to understanding the overall context of the lesson. Now these three estates were very, very, very distinct. If you look at this table right here, you can examine each estate, its population relatively to the overall population of France, the privileges they had. The exemptions category is exemptions from mostly taxes. It's the important part. And the burden is going to go with taxes. That's the part you want to focus on. So take a little bit of time, go over this table, and start to get a little bit of a feel for the conditions in France prior to the French Revolution. Notice that you see down here, the third estate had no tax exemptions, and they faced all the burdens of taxes. As some of you may have noticed, the conditions in France prior to the French Revolution were pretty unfair, and it placed a large tax burden on the lowest class. Doesn't really make a lot of sense. So, as the title of this slide suggests, France was headed towards a collapse. As alluded to, class differences in France were staggering. The system of privilege and exemptions would hurt the French economy over time. That's very key. You guys want to highlight that note. With the burden of the whole French taxation system on the third estate, the majority of whom were poor and were the peasantry, France relied on its poorest peoples to uphold its financial standing. And as I said before, France was headed towards a massive economic collapse. So again, take a little time, get these notes down, pause the video if you need to. But the two key things you're going to need to really, really, really highlight is this and also this. So you've been looking at it, and here it is. France actually declares bankruptcy. France had unfortunately experienced a series of bad harvests throughout the 1880s. Peasants, farmers who made their living off of these harvests were unable to hold their tax burden, let alone feed themselves. And with a stream of revenue trickling down to a dribble, the French King Louis XVI felt no depression. Spending money lavishly, and often on his wife Marie Antoinette, who was hated by the French people. Story for another time, but hated by the French people. The common people in France grew irate at royal ignorance. So here we see the building of these really negative feelings towards the monarch, and just utter hatred. There's no other way to describe it. Now, as I stated, the king didn't really feel too much of a depression. He wasn't really aware of how bad it truly was within the actual population of France. So now we're going to look at the depression, how the masses reacted to it. France was in a deep, deep depression, things that make today's recession look minuscule. However, similarly to today, it's often the poorest people who feel the greatest impact in times of recession and in depression. But as the recession got deeper and deeper, as time went along, the price of bread, the most basic form of food, the staple of the diet of the poor people in France, skyrocketed. Now, France was going through years of bad harvest, years of depression. Now these people couldn't even afford to eat. You could obviously tell how things are headed pretty far south. Now, if you want to rewind in the video back to the third slide, you don't actually have to do this because the stats right here. There are 25 million members of the third estate, the lower class in France. Now, although this did include middle-class people, by far, most people were of the lowest class, the toilers, the people who could, farmed very small pieces of land just to subsist, make a little bit of money on the side just to get by. Now, these people couldn't even afford to eat. Millions began to starve. Conditions in France were horrid. It was time for a change. But to make matters even worse, the summer of 1789 was the hottest on record. Now, I know that doesn't really seem like a big deal, but imagine you're starving, you're angry, you have nothing, but yet you see the king who has everything. And now you're sweating, and you're angry, and it just all culminates into this massive fireball. That is the French Revolution, and you'll see that play out. Now, as this PowerPoint and this video has been building up to, revolution is on the horizon. The air of Paris soon began to hang heavy with the thought of revolution. Tensions rose to a head as the economic issues worsened and people could still not afford to eat. King Louis XVI called the Assembly of Notables. The Assembly of Notables is a little bit similar to the Estates Generale, as we've talked about previously. However, the Assembly of Notables is different in the fact that instead of containing delegates from each estate, the Assembly of Notables was handpicked by the king because they were a specific task force to fix these economic issues. However, the assembly was rather ineffective. No progress could be made, and France could not be set right. Now I want you to take a little time, make sure you get these notes on the Assembly of Notables because they're a key aspect in understanding the French Revolution, and you will be quizzed on them in the coming future. Now we're going to take a little bit of time out and review. As the title suggests, we're going to review the Enlightenment. This isn't pointless, however. The Enlightenment played a huge role in the French Revolution. In fact, the ideals of the Enlightenment were actually embodied by the French Revolution. If you recall, French philosophers during the Age of Enlightenment began to question the ideas of the right to rule, representative governments, otherwise known as republics, and the ideas of inalienable rights. As you can see, these are some of the issues, the major issues, that the masses are clamoring for during the French Revolution. And the masses began to push for the realization of these ideas, as I just said. A form of representative government soon became the clear goal of revolutionaries. Well, we're going to go back for a second. I need you guys to star, to highlight, to asterisk, to everything. Everything you could possibly do to highlight the last point in the slide. Representative government was the goal. However, the form of representation, who's represented, who gets the right to vote, became the big question. And that's what caused a lot of disagreement, a lot of discrepancy, a lot of disintegration. You name it, this caused problems. So, like I said, get these notes down and highlight that point. And here it is, the revolution. As I said before, the King's failed project, the Assembly of Notables, failed. However, as it failed, the king was forced to reinstate the Estates Generale. And this happened on May 5th, 1789. Dates aren't key, but dates are important to understand the overall context. And the calling of the Estates Generale is kind of significant. If you remember, the last time the Estates Generale had been called to order was prior to Louis XIV. You guys all remember Louis XIV, right? You know, Sun King. Yeah, but anyway, Louis XVI, not as great of a ruler, has to rely on them to fix all of the problems of France. But this attempt failed as well. Delegates from each estate refused to acknowledge the fundamental issues, the issues of taxation, of economics. There were too many issues to even focus on. It's not really a surprise they couldn't fix them. And overall, the Estates Generale avoided progressive changes that would have helped France. They were just not equipped to change and to fix it. And all these issues and all these problems that France faced caused a lot of controversy. The high levels of controversy soon led to the disintegration of the Estates Generale. Members, specifically the Third Estate, started breaking away, and they would create what's known as the tennis court oath. This last point, tennis court oath, very key as well. It's going to be covered in the next slide. The tennis court oath, in essence, is the third estate. Expelling itself, or being expelled, depending on which way you look at it, from the Estates Generale, this new group vowed that it would write France its first constitution. Here we go, representative government. The tennis court oath draws its name, you guessed it, from meeting in a tennis court. With the hall where the Estates Generale met being otherwise occupied by the actual Estates Generale, this group of members from the Third Estate relocated to the nearest tennis court, assembled, and vowed they would not leave until a constitution was written. However, the tennis court oath isn't really that official of a name, so soon this group began to refer to itself as the National Assembly. National Assembly, again, star, highlight, asterisk, you name it, just get that into your head. National Assembly. It's one of these key phrases that you need to know. Viva la National Assembly. Long live the National Assembly. With the goal of creating a constitution for France, the National Assembly stood against the will of King Louis XVI. King Louis XVI, National Assembly, butt heads. That's me pounding my fists together because that's how much they hated each other. And it got to the point where King Louis XVI had to devise plans to use the military just to put down the National Assembly. However, upon getting word of this, the masses rose up. They were with the National Assembly, and they rioted, and they stormed the Bastille. Does anybody know what the Bastille is? Take your time, guesses. Google it. Nope, not enough time. The Bastille is a giant prison. However, it's not a prison that we know of today, where it keeps inmates and like thieves and you name it, bad people. It's not that sort of prison. The Bastille was a specific prison meant to house political prisoners, enemies that stood against the king. So you could see how this is very symbolic. Today we would call this event Bastille Day, which is July 14th, 1789. And again, this kind of just epitomizes the entirety of the French Revolution. It's that some people actually define it as the definitive starting point. Me, I'm a little bit different. I go back a little bit to the tennis court oath, but everybody's opinion is a little bit different. Okay, the purpose of this slide is just to give you a little bit of the highlights of the National Assembly. These are going to be covered much deeper later on, but this is just to give you, some insight. The National Assembly was responsible for the abolition of special privileges. By special privileges I mean the exemption from taxes, guaranteed church land, etc. They're responsible for the Constitution of 1791. This is a big thing. So get your pencils ready for next time because there's going to be a lot of notes on that. They're also responsible for the Declaration of the Rights of Man. This is another key part of the French Revolution, and its principles ring true today as well. So yeah, we're going to cover that pretty extensively too. So minor things. The National Assembly was responsible for putting forth the idea of equality before the law, that all men were seen equally in the eyes of the law. That's a principle that we operate in the United States under today. The National Assembly also produced reforms in local government and levied taxes based on the ability to pay. It's an overhaul of the previous tax system, which definitely needed it. Viva la Legislative Assembly. The Constitution of 1791 created a national governing body known as the Legislative Assembly. Here's a couple features of the Legislative Assembly. France became a limited monarchy, similar to what England had going on at the time. A king ruling, a parliament sort of system underneath, and they worked together. All laws were created by the Legislative Assembly, hence the name legislative, law creating. The ties to feudalism were absolutely abolished. Voting was limited to taxpayers, so here we have the answer to that question of who gets the right to vote. And offices were reserved for property owners. And this kind of goes into the question of what exactly should a republic consist of and who should have the right to vote. Okay, so that's all for tonight's flip lesson. I hope you guys got your notes down. Feel free to rewind, go back. I know this video isn't exactly a work of art, but they'll get better with time. And see you in class tomorrow. Enjoy.